George Washington was born in this very house in Westmoreland County, Virginia, to Augustine Washington and his second wife, Mary Ball, in the year 1732. At the young age of 4, George and his family moved to Ferry Farm, a plantation on the Rappahannock River near Fredericksburg, where George spent most of his youth. In 1743, George was just 11 years old, and Augustine Washington, his father, died. Although George was the older child of his household, Augustine left most of his property to his sons from his first marriage. Following the death of his father, his formal education ended. Although he didn't get the land from his father, Washington inherited 10 slaves from his father's estate. 6 years after his father's death, George was appointed county surveyor of the frontier county of Culpeper at only 17 years old. From the years 1751 to 1752, George Washington traveled to Barbados with his half-brother Lawrence in an attempt to cure the latter of a respiratory illness. Unfortunately, George contracted smallpox while he was at Barbados. The trip was the only time he had ever traveled outside of the North American continent. In 1753, Virginia Governor Robert Dinwiddie sent newly appointed Major George Washington to the Ohio Valley to deliver a message to the French demanding that they leave the area. A few months later, Major Washington and 150 soldiers went to the Ohio Valley to fight for Virginia's claim of the land. Washington's men engaged in a combative confrontation with the French soldiers. Following this skirmish, Washington and his men retreated to the makeshift Fort Necessity, where Washington was forced to surrender. This event deeply embarrassed Washington, and he resigned his commission. This failed campaign also sparked the French and Indian War. 2 years later, Washington returned to the Ohio frontier as a volunteer aide for General Braddock. During a battle between the French and the British near the Monongahela River, Washington exhibited great courage and leadership. He was later recognized for his conduct in battle with a promotion and was given command of the entire military force of Virginia. On January 6, 1759, George Washington married Martha Dandridge Custis, a native of the Tidewater region of Virginia. Martha Custis was the widow who had inherited an enormous amount of wealth after the passing of her first husband, Daniel Parke Custis, and was the mother of 2 young children, Jackie and Patsy. Following their marriage, the newlywed couple, Jackie and Patsy, all moved to Mount Vernon. From 1759 to 1775, George Washington was a gentleman farmer at Mount Vernon in the years between his marriage to Martha and the onset of the American Revolution. Washington experimented with different farming techniques while also expanding his home in Mount Vernon. In 1775, the newly formed Congress appointed George Washington to be the commander of the Continental Army. Washington would hold this position for the entirety of the American Revolution, totaling 8 years. Following the end of the American Revolution, Washington addressed Congress on December 23, 1783, in Annapolis, Maryland, and resigned his commission. Through this action, Washington gave the power back to the people and was declared a hero around the world. Although determined to retire from the public life after the Revolutionary War, Washington entered the public sphere and was elected president of what is now known as the Constitutional Convention in 1785. 2 years later, he was unanimously elected as the first president of the United States. He went on to be re-elected for a second term, but he refused a third term, so he retired from the presidency and all public life. By leaving office after 2 terms, Washington set a precedent that has been held to by most of the American presidents who followed him. He returned to Mount Vernon and enjoyed a peaceful retirement until he died on December 14, 1799, from a throat infection called epiglottitis in his bedroom at Mount Vernon. He was surrounded by his close friends and his loving wife, Martha. I hope you've enjoyed my short presentation of George Washington's life.